The world of Jujutsu Kaisen is one where curses, born from the negative emotions of humanity, lurk in the shadows, threatening the lives of ordinary people. To combat these malevolent entities, Jujutsu sorcerers are trained to wield cursed energy, a power derived from their emotions and spiritual strength. Among these sorcerers is Megumi Fushiguro, a stoic and determined first-year student at Tokyo Jujutsu High, whose unique ability to summon Shikigami, spiritual creatures born from his shadows, has made him a formidable fighter. But tonight, something is wrong. The shadows that have always been his allies feel distant, almost as if they are resisting his call. The air is thick with tension, and the faint hum of cursed energy in the distance suggests that something far more sinister is brewing. Megumi stands in the middle of a dimly lit alleyway, his sharp eyes scanning the darkness. His usual calm demeanor is tinged with unease as he realizes his shadows are unresponsive. This isn't right, he mutters under his breath, his voice low but steady. He clenches his fists, feeling the familiar surge of cursed energy within him, but when he attempts to summon his divine dogs, the shadows at his feet flicker weakly before dissipating entirely. His heart races as he considers the implications. Without his Shikigami, he is vulnerable, and the cursed spirits that roam this area are no ordinary threats. He knows he needs to regroup and figure out what's happening, but the sound of guttural growls echoing from the shadows tells him he won't have that luxury. Before he can react, a grotesque cursed spirit lunges at him from the darkness, its elongated claws gleaming with malice. Megumi's instincts kick in, and he sidesteps the attack with precision, his movements fluid despite the sudden disadvantage. He channels cursed energy into his fists, delivering a powerful punch to the spirit's side, causing it to stagger. But the creature recovers quickly, its twisted form contorting as it prepares to strike again. Megumi grits his teeth, his mind racing. He can't rely on his shadows, so he'll have to fight differently. He focuses his cursed energy into his feet, enhancing his speed, and dashes forward, delivering a series of rapid strikes aimed at the spirit's weak points. Each hit lands with precision, but the cursed spirit's resilience is unnerving. It retaliates with a sweeping claw attack, forcing Megumi to leap backward to avoid the blow. He lands lightly on his feet, his breathing steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. This isn't working, he thinks, his analytical mind already searching for a new strategy. As the cursed spirit charges again, a familiar voice cuts through the tension. "Need a hand, Fushiguro?" It's Yuji Itadori, his classmate and fellow first year, whose boundless energy and raw strength have made him a key asset in their battles against curses. Yuji appears at the mouth of the alley, his signature grin in place despite the gravity of the situation. Without waiting for a response, he dashes forward, his movements a blur as he closes the distance between himself and the cursed spirit. Yuji's cursed energy flares as he delivers a devastating punch to the creature's face, the force of the blow sending it crashing into a nearby wall. The spirit lets out a guttural screech before disintegrating into a cloud of cursed energy. Yuji turns to Megumi, his grin widening. "You look like you were in a bit of trouble there." Megumi exhales sharply, his expression a mix of relief and irritation. "I had it under control," he says, though the slight waver in his voice betrays his uncertainty. Yuji raises an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced, but he doesn't press the issue. Instead, he glances around the alley, his usual cheerfulness giving way to a more serious demeanor. "Something's off tonight," he says, his voice low. "The curses are more aggressive than usual, and I've been hearing whispers about some kind of uprising." Megumi's eyes narrow as he considers Yuji's words. The idea of cursed spirits organizing is troubling, but it would explain the strange behavior of his shadows. "We need to find Nobara," he says finally, referring to their third classmate, Nobara Kujisaki, whose expertise with cursed tools and nails makes her a valuable ally. "If there's a larger threat, we'll need to face it together." The two make their way through the darkened streets, their senses heightened as they search for Nobara. The city is eerily quiet, the usual hum of life replaced by an oppressive silence. As they turn a corner, they spot her standing in the middle of the road, her hammer in one hand and a cursed nail in the other. She's surrounded by three cursed spirits, each more grotesque than the last, but Nobara looks unfazed. With a flick of her wrist, she sends a nail flying toward one of the spirits, the cursed energy imbued in the weapon causing it to explode on impact. The remaining two spirits lunge at her, but she counters with a series of precise strikes, her movements graceful yet deadly. By the time Megumi and Yuji reach her, the spirits are nothing more than dissipating energy. Nobara turns to them, her expression a mix of annoyance and curiosity. "Took you long enough," she says, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I was starting to think I'd have to handle this mess on my own." Yuji laughs, the sound breaking some of the tension. "You look like you had it covered," he says, earning a smirk from Nobara. Megumi, however, remains focused. Something's wrong, he says, his tone serious. My shadows aren't responding, and the curses are more organized than usual. There's a chance they're planning something bigger. Nobra's smirk fades as she considers his words. If that's true, we're in for a rough night, she says. But we've faced worse, right? Yuji nods, his usual optimism shining through. Whatever's coming, we'll handle it together. As the trio prepares to move out, a sudden surge of cursed energy fills the air, so intense that it sends a shiver down their spines. In the distance, a massive cursed spirit emerges, its form towering over the buildings and radiating an overwhelming sense of malice. The spirit's eyes glow with a malevolent light as it lets out a deafening roar, the sound shaking the ground beneath their feet. Megumi's hands tighten into fists, his mind racing as he assesses the situation. This isn't just a cursed spirit, he says, his voice barely above a whisper. It's a special grade. Yuji and Nobra exchange a glance, their usual banter replaced by a shared understanding of the gravity of the situation. They've faced powerful curses before, but this one feels different, as if it's the harbinger of something far more dangerous. The special grade cursed spirit charges toward them, its massive claws tearing through the ground as it closes the distance. Yuji is the first to react, his cursed energy flaring as he dashes forward to meet the creature head-on. He delivers a powerful punch to its leg, the impact causing the spirit to stumble, but it recovers quickly, swiping at him with a clawed hand. Yuji leaps backward, narrowly avoiding the attack, but the force of the swing sends a shockwave through the air, knocking him off balance. Nobra takes advantage of the distraction, sending a barrage of cursed nails toward the spirit's eyes. The nails strike true, causing the creature to roar in pain, but it doesn't slow down. Instead, it lashes out with a whip-like tail, forcing Nobra to dive out of the way. Megumi watches the battle unfold, his mind racing as he tries to figure out how to contribute without his shadows. He focuses his cursed energy into his hands, forming a makeshift weapon of pure energy, and joins the fight. He strikes at the spirit's side, the energy blade cutting deep, but the wound heals almost instantly. The spirit turns its attention to him, its eyes burning with rage, and Megumi barely manages to dodge its next attack. As the battle rages on, it becomes clear that this cursed spirit is unlike anything they've faced before. Its strength, speed, and regenerative abilities make it a formidable opponent, and the trio is forced to fight defensively, their usual tactics proving ineffective. As the night wears on, the cursed spirit shows no signs of weakening, and the trio begins to tire. Just when it seems like they might be overwhelmed, a familiar voice calls out from the shadows. You kids really know how to make a mess. It's Satoru Gojo, their teacher and one of the most powerful Jujutsu sorcerers in the world. His arrival shifts the tide of the battle, his overwhelming strength and mastery of cursed energy allowing him to quickly subdue the special grade spirit. But even as the immediate threat is neutralized, Gojo's usual carefree demeanor is absent, replaced by a rare seriousness. This isn't over, he says, his voice low. The cursed spirits are organizing, and if we don't act soon, things are going to get much worse. The trio exchanges uneasy glances, the weight of Gojo's words settling over them. The initial conflict may have been resolved, but the larger threat looms on the horizon, and they know that their skills and resolve will be tested like never before. As they prepare to face whatever comes next, one thing is clear, the shadows are no longer their allies, and the world of Jujutsu sorcery is on the brink of chaos. The air was thick with tension as Fushiguro Megumi stood in the dimly lit alley, his shadows conspicuously absent. His cursed energy flickered weakly, a stark contrast to the usual commanding presence he exuded. The absence of his Shikigami, his most reliable allies, left him feeling exposed and vulnerable. Beside him, Kujisaki Nobara gripped her hammer tightly, her nails at the ready, while Itadori Yuji cracked his knuckles, his usual grin replaced by a grim determination. The trio had barely recovered from the ambush in Part 1, and now they were faced with an even more dire situation. The spirits they had been hunting were not only growing stronger but were also organizing a revolt. The whispers of betrayal among the Jujutsu sorcerers only added to the chaos. The first sign of trouble had come hours earlier, when a low-ranking sorcerer reported seeing a horde of cursed spirits gathering in the abandoned district of Shibuya. What was unusual was their behavior. They weren't attacking randomly or feeding on fear. Instead, they seemed to be communicating, coordinating. This level of intelligence was unprecedented, and it sent a chill down Megumi's spine. If they're planning something, we need to stop them before it's too late, he muttered, his voice tense. Yuji nodded, his fists clenched. Yeah, but without your shadows, we're at a disadvantage. We'll have to rely on each other more than ever. Nobara smirked, though her eyes betrayed her unease. Don't worry, I'll carry you two if I have to. As they moved deeper into the district, the atmosphere grew heavier. The streets were eerily quiet, the only sound being the faint rustle of cursed energy in the air. Suddenly, a low growl echoed from a nearby alley, and a massive cursed spirit emerged, its grotesque form pulsating with dark energy. It was unlike anything they had faced before. Its body was a twisted amalgamation of limbs and eyes, and its aura was suffocating. "This one's strong," Yuji said, his voice steady but his muscles tense. "Let's take it down fast." The battle began in a blur of motion. Yuji lunged forward, his enhanced strength allowing him to close the distance in an instant. He delivered a powerful punch to the spirit's torso, but the creature barely flinched, its flesh rippling like water. Before Yuji could react, a tendril shot out, slamming him into a nearby wall. Nobara cursed under her breath and hurled a nail, aiming for one of the spirit's many eyes. The nail struck true, and the spirit let out a guttural roar, but it didn't slow down. Instead, it turned its attention to her, its movements unnervingly precise. Megumi, still reeling from the loss of his shadows, knew he had to adapt. He focused his cursed energy, summoning a simple Shikigami, a small, bird-like creature, to distract the spirit. It wasn't much, but it bought Nobara enough time to reposition. She slammed her hammer into the ground, sending a wave of cursed energy that disrupted the spirit's form momentarily. "Yuji, now," she shouted. Yuji, recovering quickly, dashed forward again, this time aiming for the spirit's core. His fist connected with a sickening crunch, and the spirit let out a final, ear-piercing shriek before dissolving into black mist. The trio took a moment to catch their breath, but the victory felt hollow. "That thing was different," Yuji said, his voice low. "It was like it knew what we were going to do." Megumi nodded, his expression grim. "They're evolving. If they're learning from us, this is going to get a lot worse." Nobara wiped sweat from her brow, her usual bravado slipping. "And we still don't know why your shadows are gone. What if it's not just bad luck? What if someone's sabotaging us?" Her words hung heavily in the air. The possibility of betrayal within their ranks was something they had all considered but hadn't dared to voice. The Jujutsu world was already fractured, and trust was a rare commodity. "We can't think about that now," Megumi said finally. "We need to focus on stopping this revolt. If the spirits succeed, it won't matter who's on our side." As they pressed on, the signs of the spirits' organization became more apparent. The streets were littered with cursed energy traps, and the spirits themselves moved in coordinated groups, ambushing the trio at every turn. Each encounter was more grueling than the last, and the strain was beginning to show. Yuji's punches grew slower, Nobara's aim less precise, and Megumi's cursed energy reserves were dwindling. Yet, they pushed forward, driven by a shared determination to protect the world they had sworn to defend. The turning point came when they stumbled upon a makeshift stronghold deep within the district. The building was surrounded by a barrier of cursed energy, and the spirits inside were clearly preparing for something big. "This is it," Megumi said, his voice barely above a whisper. "If we don't stop them here, we might not get another chance." Yuji cracked a small smile, despite the gravity of the situation. "Then let's make it count." The battle that followed was a chaotic symphony of curses, fists, and nails. Megumi, despite his limitations, used his environment to his advantage, summoning Shikigami from the shadows of nearby objects to create distractions and openings. Yuji and Nobara fought back to back, their teamwork seamless despite the exhaustion. At one point, Yuji used a nearby lamppost as a weapon, ripping it from the ground and swinging it with all his might to clear a path. Nobara, meanwhile, unleashed a barrage of nails infused with cursed energy, each strike precise and devastating. But the spirits were relentless, and their numbers seemed endless. Just as the trio began to falter, a familiar voice rang out. "Need a hand?" Gojo Satoru appeared in a flash of blue light, his blindfold slightly askew and a playful smirk on his face. The relief was palpable, but it was short-lived. "Don't get too comfortable," Gojo said, his tone uncharacteristically serious. "This is just the beginning." As Gojo joined the fray, the tide of the battle shifted. His overwhelming power decimated the spirits, but even he couldn't hide the concern in his eyes. "Something's not right," he said as the last of the spirits dissipated. "This level of coordination. It's not natural." Megumi nodded, his mind racing. "We think someone might be helping them. A traitor." Gojo's smirk faded, replaced by a cold, calculating expression. "If that's true, then we have a bigger problem than we thought." The chapter ended with the group regrouping, their exhaustion evident but their resolve unshaken. The stakes had never been higher, and the threat of betrayal loomed over them like a dark cloud. As they prepared for the next phase of their mission, one thing was clear: the shadows of doubt were just as dangerous as the enemies they faced. The air was thick with tension as Fushiguro Megumi stood in the dimly lit alley, his shadows flickering weakly at his feet. The absence of his curse technique was palpable, a void that left him feeling exposed and vulnerable. Beside him, Itadori Yuji clenched his fists, his eyes darting around the narrow space, while Kujisaki Nobara twirled her hammer, her usual confidence tinged with unease. The trio had been tracking a surge of cursed energy in the area, but what they found was far more unsettling than they had anticipated. From the shadows emerged a figure, tall and lithe, with an aura that seemed to distort the very air around them. Their face was obscured by a hood, but their presence was unmistakable, a cursed energy so dense it felt like a physical weight pressing down on the group. Well, the figure drawled, their voice smooth and mocking, if it isn't the Jujutsu high prodigies. I've been waiting for this moment. Who are you? Fushiguro demanded, his voice steady despite the unease gnawing at him. The figure chuckled, a low, menacing sound that sent a shiver down Kujisaki's spine. Call me Akira, they said, stepping fully into the light. Their hood fell back to reveal sharp, angular features and eyes that glowed with an eerie, golden light. And I'm here to make sure your little rebellion doesn't get in the way of the spirit's plans. Before anyone could react, Akira moved. Their speed was inhuman, a blur of motion that left afterimages in their wake. Yuji barely had time to raise his arms in defense as Akira's fist collided with his guard, the force of the blow sending him skidding back several feet. Yuji, Kujisaki shouted, her hammer already swinging toward Akira. But the newcomer was faster, ducking under her attack and countering with a spinning kick that forced her to leap back to avoid being hit. Fushiguro stepped forward, his hands forming a seal despite the weakness of his shadows. Divine Dog, Totality. He called, but the shadowy wolf that emerged was smaller, less substantial than usual. Akira smirked, their golden eyes gleaming with amusement. Is that all you've got? They taunted, sidestepping the wolf's lunge with ease. With a flick of their wrist, a surge of cursed energy erupted from their hand, striking the wolf and dissipating it into nothingness. Yuji recovered quickly, his cursed energy flaring as he charged at Akira. Black flash, he roared, his fist crackling with power. Akira's eyes widened slightly, but they didn't retreat. Instead, they met Yuji's attack head-on, their own cursed energy coalescing into a shimmering barrier that absorbed the impact. The force of the collision sent shockwaves rippling through the alley, shattering windows and sending debris flying. Kujisaki seized the opportunity, hurling a nail infused with her cursed energy toward Akira. Resonance, she shouted, but Akira was already moving, their body twisting in midair to avoid the nail. They landed gracefully, their smirk widening. Not bad, they said, but you'll have to do better than that. Fushiguro gritted his teeth, frustration and fear warring within him. Without his shadows, he felt useless, a liability rather than an asset. But he couldn't give up. Not now. He reached deep within himself, searching for the remnants of his cursed energy. Come on, he muttered under his breath, I know you're still there. Akira's attention shifted back to Fushiguro, their golden eyes narrowing. You're the one they call the shadow user, aren't you? They said, their tone almost conversational. Pity. You're not much of a threat without your technique. They raised a hand, cursed energy gathering in their palm. Let's end this. Before Akira could strike, a new voice cut through the tension. I wouldn't do that if I were you. The words were calm, almost casual, but they carried an undercurrent of power that made everyone freeze. A figure stepped into the alley, their presence commanding immediate attention. They were tall, with long, silver hair that shimmered in the dim light, and eyes that glowed a deep, icy blue. Their cursed energy was unlike anything the group had ever felt, cold, precise, and utterly controlled. Akira's smirk faltered for the first time. You, they said, their voice tinged with something that might have been fear. The newcomer inclined their head slightly. Me, they replied. And I suggest you leave these children alone. They're not your concern. For a moment, it seemed as though Akira might argue. But then they hesitated, their golden eyes flickering with uncertainty. With a final, venomous glare at the group, they turned and vanished into the shadows, their cursed energy dissipating like smoke. The newcomer turned to face the trio, their icy gaze sweeping over them. You're lucky I arrived when I did, they said, their voice calm but firm. Akira is not someone you want to face unprepared. Who are you? Yuji asked, his voice filled with a mix of awe and suspicion. The newcomer smiled faintly. My name is Sora, they said. And I've been watching you for some time. You've caught the attention of some very dangerous people. Fushiguro stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. What do you mean? He asked. Sora's gaze softened slightly as they looked at him. Your shadows, they said, they're not gone. They've been suppressed. By someone, or something, far more powerful than you realize. The words hit Fushiguro like a punch to the gut. Suppressed? He repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. Sora nodded. Yes, they said. And if you want to regain your power, you'll need my help. Kujisaki crossed her arms, her expression skeptical. And why should we trust you? She demanded. Sora's smile didn't waver. You don't have to, they said. But if you want to survive what's coming, you'll need all the allies you can get. The group exchanged uneasy glances. Sora's arrival had shifted the balance, introducing a new dynamic that none of them had anticipated. They were no longer just fighting against the spirits, they were caught in a web of hidden motives and unseen forces. And as they stood there in the alley, the weight of that realization settled over them like a heavy fog. Sora turned to leave, their silver hair catching the light as they moved. Think about it, they said over their shoulder. But don't take too long. Time is not on your side. As they disappeared into the night, the trio was left with more questions than answers. Who was Sora, really? And what did they want? One thing was certain, their lives had just become a lot more complicated. And in the world of Jujutsu sorcery, complications often led to chaos. The air was thick with tension as Fushiguro Megumi stood at the edge of the battlefield, his shadows flickering erratically. The absence of his curse technique, his shadows, had left him vulnerable, and the spirits he once controlled now roamed freely, their malevolent energy palpable. The spirits, emboldened by their newfound freedom, had begun to organize, whispering of a revolt that could tip the balance of power in the Jujutsu world. Megumi clenched his fists, his mind racing. He had always relied on his shadows, but now, stripped of his greatest weapon, he felt a gnawing desperation creeping in. The stakes had never been higher. The plan had been simple: infiltrate the spirits gathering, disrupt their coordination, and buy time for reinforcements. But as Megumi and his allies, Itadori Yuji and Kujisaki Nobara, moved through the dense forest, they realized too late that they had walked into a trap. The spirits, far more organized than anticipated, had anticipated their every move. The forest erupted in chaos as cursed spirits emerged from the shadows, their grotesque forms twisting and writhing. Yuji charged forward, his fists glowing with cursed energy, while Nobara unleashed a barrage of nails, each one infused with her technique. But the spirits were relentless, their numbers overwhelming. Megumi fought with everything he had, relying on his physical combat skills and cursed tools. He dodged a swipe from a massive, clawed spirit, countering with a precise strike from his staff. But without his shadows, he felt incomplete, like a part of him was missing. The realization hit him hard: he had always defined himself by his technique, and now, without it, he was struggling to find his footing. The emotional weight of this revelation threatened to paralyze him, but he pushed it aside, focusing on the fight. He couldn't afford to falter now. The tide of the battle shifted when a figure emerged from the shadows, their presence commanding and ominous. It was a cursed spirit, but unlike any they had faced before. Its form was humanoid, its features almost elegant, but its eyes burned with a cold, calculating intelligence. The spirit raised a hand, and the air around them seemed to warp, the very fabric of reality bending to its will. Megumi's breath caught in his throat as he realized the truth: this was no ordinary spirit. This was the orchestrator of the revolt, a being of immense power and cunning. The spirit spoke, its voice a chilling blend of malice and amusement. You thought you could stop us, Fushiguro Megumi? How quaint. Your shadows are gone, and with them, your strength. You are nothing without them. The words struck a nerve, and Megumi felt a surge of anger and self-doubt. But before he could respond, the spirit attacked, its movements impossibly fast. Megumi barely managed to block the strike, the force of it sending him skidding backward. Yuji and Nobara rushed to his aid, but the spirit's power was overwhelming. It seemed to anticipate their every move, countering their attacks with ease. As the fight dragged on, the situation grew increasingly dire. Yuji's cursed energy was waning, and Nobara's nails were running low. Megumi, battered and bruised, knew they couldn't keep this up. He needed a plan, a way to turn the tide. But without his shadows, his options were limited. Desperation clawed at him, but then, a memory surfaced, a lesson from Gojo Satoru. Your technique is just a tool, Megumi. True strength comes from within. The words echoed in his mind, and suddenly, he understood. He had been relying too much on his shadows, forgetting the core of what made him a Jujutsu sorcerer. With renewed determination, Megumi stepped forward, his eyes locked on the spirit. You're wrong, he said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. My shadows are a part of me, but they don't define me. I am more than my technique. The spirit sneered, but Megumi didn't give it a chance to respond. He charged, his movements fluid and precise. He dodged the spirit's attacks, using his environment to his advantage. He grabbed a fallen branch, infusing it with cursed energy, and struck with all his might. The spirit staggered, its form flickering for a moment. It was a small victory, but it was enough to reignite hope in his allies. Yuji and Nobara rallied, their attacks growing more coordinated. Yuji landed a devastating punch, the impact sending shockwaves through the air, while Nobara's nail struck true, piercing the spirit's defenses. But the spirit wasn't done yet. With a roar, it unleashed a wave of cursed energy, the force of it knocking them all off their feet. Megumi hit the ground hard, pain shooting through his body. He struggled to his feet, his vision blurring, but he refused to give up. He couldn't. The spirit loomed over them, its expression triumphant. "You fought well, but it's over," it said, raising its hand for the final blow. But before it could strike, something shifted. The air grew heavy, and a familiar presence filled the space. Megumi's shadows, long absent, surged to life, swirling around him like a protective barrier. The spirit's eyes widened in shock, and Megumi felt a surge of power unlike anything he had ever experienced. His shadows weren't just back, they were stronger, more vibrant, as if they had been waiting for this moment. With a roar, Megumi unleashed his shadows, their forms twisting and merging into a massive, serpentine creature. It lunged at the spirit, its jaws closing around its form. The spirit struggled, its power faltering under the onslaught. Megumi didn't stop there. He poured every ounce of his energy into the attack, his shadows growing darker and more menacing. The spirit let out a final, ear-piercing scream before it was consumed, its form dissolving into nothingness. The battlefield fell silent, the remaining spirits scattering in fear. Megumi collapsed to his knees, his body trembling with exhaustion. Yuji and Nobara rushed to his side, their expressions a mix of relief and awe. "You did it," Yuji said, his voice filled with admiration. Megumi shook his head, his breathing ragged. "We did it," he corrected. "I couldn't have done this without you." As they caught their breath, the weight of what had just happened settled over them. The spirit's revolt had been thwarted, but at a great cost. Megumi's shadows had returned, but he knew now that they were just one part of who he was. The experience had forced him to confront his insecurities and redefine his strength. The road ahead was still fraught with danger, but for the first time in a long while, Megumi felt a glimmer of hope. They had faced the darkness and emerged stronger. And that, he realized, was what truly mattered. The forest was quiet now, the echoes of battle fading into the night. But the fight was far from over. The Jujutsu world was changing, and Megumi and his allies would need to adapt if they were to survive. As they prepared to move out, Megumi cast one last glance at the shadows swirling around him. They were a part of him, but they didn't define him. And with that realization, he felt ready to face whatever came next. The air was thick with tension as the remnants of the Jujutsu High team regrouped in the dimly lit confines of their makeshift hideout. Fushiguro's shadows, his most reliable technique, had vanished without warning, leaving him vulnerable and the team scrambling to adapt. The spirits, emboldened by this sudden weakness, were rumored to be planning a coordinated revolt, their malevolent energies coalescing into a storm of chaos that threatened to engulf the city. The stakes had never been higher, and the clock was ticking. Yuji Itadori paced the room, his fists clenched. "We can't just sit here. If the spirits are planning something big, we need to hit them first," he said, his voice tight with frustration. Nobara Kujisaki leaned against the wall, her hammer resting at her side. "Easy for you to say, but without Fushiguro's shadows, we're down a major weapon. We need a plan, not just brute force." Gojo Satoru, ever the enigmatic mentor, leaned back in his chair, his blindfold obscuring his eyes but not the gravity of his tone. "Fushiguro's condition is a mystery, but we can't afford to wait for answers. The spirits are growing stronger, and their coordination suggests a leader, a cursed spirit with intelligence and ambition. We need to find them and cut off the head of the snake." The team agreed to split their efforts. Yuji and Nobara would train intensively, pushing their limits to compensate for Fushiguro's absence. Meanwhile, Gojo and Fushiguro would investigate the source of the shadow disruption, hoping to uncover a weakness in the enemy's plans. The clock was ticking, and every moment wasted brought them closer to disaster. Yuji and Nobara's training was grueling. They sparred in an abandoned warehouse, the air thick with the sound of clashing weapons and the crackle of cursed energy. Yuji focused on refining his divergent fist technique, experimenting with ways to amplify its impact. He practiced striking with precision, channeling his cursed energy into his fists in controlled bursts. Nobara, meanwhile, honed her resonance technique, using straw dolls to target multiple enemies at once. She drilled relentlessly, her movements becoming faster and more fluid. During one session, Yuji had an idea. What if we combine our techniques? He asked, panting from exertion. Nobara raised an eyebrow. How? Yuji grinned. If you tag a spirit with your resonance, and I hit it with Divergent Fist, the delayed impact could amplify the damage. We'd hit them twice in one go. Nobara considered this, then nodded. Worth a shot. Let's try it. They set up a dummy curse spirit, a makeshift target infused with residual energy. Nobara struck first, embedding a nail into the dummy and activating resonance. Yuji followed up with a powerful Divergent Fist, his cursed energy surging through the target. The delayed impact triggered a shockwave, shattering the dummy into pieces. It worked, Yuji exclaimed, his face lit with triumph. Nobara smirked. Don't get cocky. We'll need to test it against the real thing. Meanwhile, Gojo and Fushiguro scoured the city for clues. They visited sites of recent spirit activity, piecing together a pattern. Fushiguro, though weakened, used his analytical skills to identify a common thread. The spirits were converging around a cursed object, an ancient relic rumored to amplify their powers. If we destroy the relic, we might disrupt their plans, Fushiguro suggested. Gojo nodded. But getting to it won't be easy. The spirits will be guarding it fiercely. The team reconvened to share their findings. We've got a plan, Yuji said, his confidence bolstered by their training. Nobara and I can handle the spirits while you two go for the relic. Gojo shook his head. It's too risky. The relic's location is deep in their territory, and we'll be outnumbered. We need to strike fast and smart. They devised a strategy. Yuji and Nobara would create a diversion, drawing the spirits away from the relic while Gojo and Fushiguro infiltrated the site. The plan hinged on timing and precision, with no room for error. As night fell, the team moved into position, the weight of their mission pressing heavily on their shoulders. The battle began with a deafening roar as Yuji and Nobara unleashed their combined technique on a group of spirits. The shockwave tore through the enemy ranks, buying precious seconds. The spirits, enraged, turned their attention to the duo, their numbers overwhelming. Yuji fought with relentless determination, his fists a blur of motion. Nobara danced through the chaos, her hammer and nails striking with deadly accuracy. Meanwhile, Gojo and Fushiguro slipped through the shadows, their movements silent and swift. They reached the relic, a grotesque altar pulsating with cursed energy. Fushiguro's hands trembled as he prepared to destroy it, his lack of shadows making the task more difficult. Gojo placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. You've got this, he said. Fushiguro nodded, focusing his remaining energy into a single, powerful strike. The relic shattered, its energy dissipating in a blinding flash. The spirits, sensing the relic's destruction, faltered. Yuji and Nobara seized the opportunity, pressing their advantage. The tide of the battle turned, the team's growth and ingenuity shining through. As the last spirit fell, the team regrouped, battered but victorious. But their celebration was short-lived. In the distance, a new threat loomed, a massive cursed spirit, its form shifting and writhing with power. The team exchanged grim looks. This isn't over, Yuji said, his voice steady. Nobara tightened her grip on her hammer. Then let's finish it. The final battle was a test of everything they had learned. Yuji and Nobara fought side by side, their combined techniques wreaking havoc. Gojo unleashed his full power, his limitless technique bending reality itself. Fushiguro, though weakened, used his wits to outmaneuver the enemy, exploiting its weaknesses. The cursed spirit fell, its form dissolving into nothingness. The team stood amidst the wreckage, their breaths heavy but their spirits unbroken. They had faced overwhelming odds and emerged victorious, their growth evident in every strike and strategy. As the sun rose over the city, the team knew their fight was far from over. But for now, they had bought themselves time and hope. Together, they would face whatever came next, their bonds stronger than ever. The shadows may have faded, but their light burned brighter than ever. The air crackled with cursed energy as the battlefield erupted into chaos. Fushiguro Megumi stood at the epicenter, his shadows flickering erratically, their usual stability shattered. The spirits he once commanded had turned against him, their glowing eyes filled with malice as they surged forward in a coordinated revolt. Behind them, a towering cursed spirit loomed, its presence radiating an oppressive aura that sent shivers down the spines of even the most seasoned Jujutsu sorcerers. This was no ordinary uprising, it was a full-scale rebellion, and the stakes had never been higher. Megumi clenched his fists, his mind racing. His shadows were his greatest weapon, but now they were his greatest liability. He couldn't rely on them, not when they were being manipulated by the enemy. He gritted his teeth, forcing himself to adapt. If he couldn't use his shadows, he'd have to fight without them. He dropped into a defensive stance, his cursed energy flaring as he prepared for the onslaught. The first wave of spirits lunged at him, their claws extended and fangs bared. Megumi sidestepped, his movements fluid and precise, but the sheer number of attackers overwhelmed him. A spirit's talons grazed his arm, drawing blood. He winced but didn't falter, countering with a swift kick that sent the spirit crashing into its allies. He followed up with a burst of cursed energy, creating a shockwave that scattered the horde momentarily. But they regrouped quickly, their numbers seemingly endless. Nearby, Kujisaki Nobara was locked in her own battle, her hammer and nails glowing with cursed energy. She swung with brutal efficiency, each strike resonating with a satisfying crack as she dismantled the spirits one by one. "These guys just don't know when to quit," she shouted, her voice tinged with both frustration and exhilaration. She spun on her heel, driving a nail into the ground and unleashing a wave of cursed energy that obliterated a cluster of spirits. But even she was beginning to feel the strain, her movements slowing as fatigue set in. Yuji Itadori, meanwhile, was a whirlwind of raw power. His fists moved like lightning, each punch landing with devastating force. He ducked under a spirit swipe, countering with an uppercut that sent it flying into the air. He leapt after it, delivering a spinning kick that shattered its form into fragments of cursed energy. But as he landed, he noticed something unsettling: the spirits weren't staying down. Their energy was reforming, their bodies knitting back together. "What the hell?" he muttered, his brow furrowing. "They're regenerating?" The towering curse spirit at the center of the battlefield let out a guttural laugh, its voice echoing like thunder. "Foolish sorcerers," it sneered. "You cannot defeat what you do not understand. Your efforts are meaningless." Megumi's eyes narrowed. He had to figure out how to stop the regeneration, and fast. He glanced at Yuji and Nobara, who were holding their own but clearly struggling. "We need a new strategy," he shouted. "We can't keep wasting energy like this." Nobara nodded, her expression grim. "Any bright ideas, genius?" Megumi's mind raced. If the spirits were being controlled by the cursed spirit, then taking it down might break their hold. But getting to it wouldn't be easy, not with the horde in the way. He needed a distraction, something to buy them time. His gaze fell on Yuji, and an idea began to form. "Itadori," he called. "I need you to draw their attention. Can you handle that?" Yuji grinned, cracking his knuckles. "Leave it to me." He charged forward, his cursed energy surging as he unleashed a flurry of punches and kicks. The spirits turned their focus to him, swarming like a pack of ravenous wolves. Yuji moved with incredible speed, dodging and weaving through their attacks, but even he couldn't avoid every hit. A spirit's claws raked across his chest, drawing blood, but he barely flinched. "Is that all you've got?" he taunted, his voice steady despite the pain. With Yuji drawing the bulk of the spirit's attention, Megumi and Nobara seized the opportunity. "Now," Megumi shouted, sprinting toward the towering cursed spirit. Nobara followed close behind, her hammer at the ready. The cursed spirit roared, its massive arm swinging down in an attempt to crush them. Megumi leapt to the side, narrowly avoiding the attack, while Nobara rolled under its arm and came up swinging. She drove a nail into its leg, the cursed energy resonating through its body and causing it to stagger. Megumi didn't waste a second. He summoned his divine dog, the white Shikigami materializing in a flash of light. "Go for the throat," he commanded. The divine dog lunged, its fangs sinking into the cursed spirit's arm. It howled in pain, its grip on the spirits faltering for a moment. Megumi felt a flicker of hope, this was their chance. But the cursed spirit wasn't done yet. With a roar, it ripped its arm free from the divine dog's jaws and slammed it into the ground, creating a shockwave that sent Megumi and Nobara flying. They hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of them. The cursed spirit loomed over them, its eyes glowing with malice. "You are persistent," it growled. "But persistence alone will not save you." Megumi struggled to his feet, his body aching but his resolve unshaken. He couldn't give up, not now. He closed his eyes, focusing on the cursed energy within him. If he couldn't rely on his shadows, he'd have to tap into something deeper. He felt a surge of power, raw and untamed, coursing through his veins. His eyes snapped open, glowing with an otherworldly light. "Domain expansion," he whispered. The battlefield shifted as Megumi's domain materialized, a dark void filled with swirling shadows. The cursed spirit hesitated, its confidence wavering. Megumi moved with newfound speed and precision, his attacks amplified by the domain's power. He struck with a series of rapid blows, each one landing with devastating force. The cursed spirit roared in frustration, its attacks growing wild and erratic. Nobara, seeing her chance, joined the fray. She drove a nail into the cursed spirit's side, the cursed energy resonating through its body and causing it to convulse. "This ends now," she shouted, her voice filled with determination. Yuji, still holding off the horde, saw the opening and made his move. He charged forward, his fists glowing with cursed energy. "Megumi! Nobara! Get clear!" he yelled. They leapt out of the way as Yuji delivered a final, earth-shattering punch to the cursed spirit's core. The impact sent a shockwave rippling through the battlefield, the cursed spirit's form disintegrating into nothingness. The spirits, now freed from its control, dissipated into the air, their malevolent energy fading. The battlefield fell silent, the only sound the heavy breathing of the exhausted sorcerers. Megumi collapsed to his knees, his body spent but his spirit unbroken. "We did it," he murmured, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Yuji and Nobara joined him, their faces reflecting a mix of relief and triumph. "That was too close," Nobara said, wiping sweat from her brow. Yuji chuckled, though it was tinged with exhaustion. "Yeah, but we pulled through. That's what matters." As the dust settled, the three of them sat together, their bond stronger than ever. They had faced the impossible and emerged victorious, but they knew this was only the beginning. The shadows may have been gone, but the darkness still loomed, and they would need to be ready for whatever came next. The air crackled with cursed energy as Fushiguro Megumi stood at the epicenter of chaos, his shadow technique faltering for the first time in his life. The spirits he had once commanded with precision now writhed in rebellion, their forms twisting into grotesque shapes as they turned against him. The battlefield was a maelstrom of destruction, with cursed spirits surging like a tidal wave, their collective rage directed at the Jujutsu sorcerers. Gojo Satoru, though still sealed, loomed as a spectral presence in the minds of his students, a reminder of the stakes. This was not just a fight for survival, it was a battle for the soul of the Jujutsu world. Megumi's breath came in ragged gasps as he dodged a swipe from a towering cursed spirit, its claws grazing his shoulder. Blood seeped through his uniform, but he gritted his teeth, forcing his mind to focus. His shadows, once an extension of his will, now felt like a foreign entity, slipping through his fingers like water. "Why now?" he muttered, his voice barely audible over the cacophony. The spirit's revolt was unprecedented, their defiance a direct challenge to his authority. He could feel their malice, their hunger for freedom, and it terrified him. But terror wasn't an option. Not when his friends were counting on him. Nearby, Itadori Yuji and Kujisaki Nobara fought back to back, their movements a blur of speed and precision. Yuji's fists glowed with cursed energy as he delivered a devastating uppercut to a spirit, sending it crashing into the ground. Nobara's hammer swung in deadly arcs, her nails piercing through the spirit's cores with unerring accuracy. But even they were beginning to falter. The sheer number of enemies was overwhelming, and the spirit's newfound ferocity made them unpredictable. "Megumi," Yuji shouted, his voice strained. "We can't keep this up forever." Megumi's eyes narrowed as he assessed the situation. The spirit's revolt wasn't random, it was orchestrated. Somewhere in the shadows, a higher intelligence was pulling the strings, exploiting the instability in the Jujutsu world. He clenched his fists, his mind racing. If he couldn't control his shadows, he'd have to outthink them. "Yuji, Nobara, cover me," he yelled, his voice cutting through the chaos. "I need a minute." As his friends moved to shield him, Megumi closed his eyes, delving deep into the well of his cursed energy. He could feel the spirit's resentment, their desire to break free from the chains of servitude. But beneath their rage, he sensed something else: fear. They were afraid of being used, of losing their autonomy. And in that moment, Megumi realized the truth. He had been treating his shadows as tools, not as allies. If he wanted to regain control, he'd have to earn their trust. With a deep breath, Megumi extended his hands, his cursed energy flowing outward like a gentle wave. "I understand now," he whispered, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "You're not just extensions of my power, you're beings with your own will. I've been wrong to treat you as anything less." The spirits hesitated, their movements slowing as they turned their attention to him. Megumi's voice grew stronger, his resolve unshakable. "If you fight with me, I promise to respect your autonomy. Together, we can end this." For a moment, the battlefield fell silent, the tension palpable. Then, one by one, the spirits began to shift, their forms stabilizing as they turned to face the true enemy, the orchestrator of their revolt. Megumi's shadows surged to life, their power magnified by the newfound bond between sorcerer and spirit. He felt a surge of energy unlike anything he'd experienced before, his connection to his shadows deeper and more profound than ever. The final battle reached its climax as Megumi, Yuji, and Nobara launched a coordinated assault on the mastermind behind the Spirit's rebellion. The enemy, a cursed spirit of immense power, towered over them, its form a grotesque amalgamation of darkness and malice. But the trio fought with everything they had, their movements a symphony of precision and determination. Yuji's fist slammed into the Spirit's core, each strike fueled by his unyielding resolve. Nobara's nails found their mark, shattering the Spirit's defenses with surgical precision. And Megumi, his shadows now fully under his control, unleashed a devastating attack that tore through the Spirit's form, leaving it vulnerable. With a final, earth-shattering blow, the cursed spirit was defeated, its form disintegrating into nothingness. The battlefield fell silent, the Spirit's revolt quelled. Megumi collapsed to his knees, his body trembling with exhaustion. But despite the fatigue, he felt a sense of peace. He had faced his greatest fear, losing control, and emerged stronger for it. Yuji and Nobara stood beside him, their expressions a mix of relief and pride. They had done the impossible. In the aftermath, the Jujutsu world began to heal. The spirits, no longer bound by resentment, returned to their natural state, their presence a reminder of the delicate balance between sorcerers and curses. Megumi's breakthrough had far-reaching implications, reshaping the way sorcerers approached their techniques. No longer were shadows seen as mere tools, they were partners, allies in the fight against darkness. As for Megumi, he emerged from the battle with a newfound sense of purpose. He had proven himself not just as a sorcerer, but as a leader. The scars of the battle would remain, but they were a testament to his growth. And as he looked out over the horizon, the sun breaking through the clouds, he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them with the strength of his shadows, and his friends, by his side. The final battle had defined them, pushing them to their limits and beyond. And in that moment of triumph, they had not only saved the Jujutsu world, they had reshaped it, forging a future where sorcerers and spirits could coexist in harmony. The road ahead would be long, but for Megumi, Yuji, and Nobara, it was a journey they were ready to face together.